Vivienne Cho was standing in the middle of my kitchen with flour on her left cheek and a bowl of batter she was threatening to make into something. And I was trying very hard to pretend I was reading the ingredient list she had handed me and not just watching the way she bit her bottom lip when she was concentrating. The bowl had been her idea. The whole Saturday had been her idea. She had texted me at 9 in the morning, "Come over, I'm stress baking. Bring your hands in your silence." And I had grabbed my keys before she finished the sentence. That was how most things worked with us. Vivienne was a senior exhibition designer at the Aldridge Center for Contemporary Art in Chicago, which meant she spent most of her professional life making beautiful things look inevitable. She could read a gallery floor plan the way other people read faces. She knew exactly where light would fall at 4 p.m. in November, which walls needed breathing room, and which donors needed a story planted in their ear early enough to feel like their own idea. She was good at her job in the way that made people forget how hard the job actually was. She was also the person I had been closest to for almost 3 years, and she was currently dusting her hands on a dish towel and looking at me like she needed me to say something first. I didn't. I handed her the vanilla extract. She took it without looking, measured it wrong, and poured it in anyway. The batter smelled like something warm and forgiving. I had met Vivienne at an industry mixer. I had no business attending. My firm handles structural consultation for commercial interiors, and someone on our team had decided that meant we belonged at a gallery networking event in River North on a Tuesday in March. I had been standing near a drinks table, trying to calculate how long I needed to stay to count as having attended when she walked up beside me, looked at the crowd, and said, without preamble, "Does it feel to you like everyone here is performing at someone who isn't in the room?" I looked at her. She was watching the crowd with an expression that was not unkind, just precise. I said, "I think the someone is probably a grant committee." She laughed, short and genuine, and said, "I'm Vivienne." I said, "I'm Will." After that, we somehow became the kind of people who texted each other about problems that were not technically emergencies, but felt like them anyway. Bad client days. Good news that needed a witness. The particular exhaustion of being competent in public all week and then needing somewhere quiet to put it down. We called each other close friends because that was the honest label. It covered everything without requiring a conversation neither of us was ready to have. Until the Saturday she started stress baking and I started not reading the ingredient list. "The ganache is going to seize if you don't stir it," she said. I stirred it. She leaned against the counter beside me and looked at the pan. Her shoulder was maybe 2 inches from mine. She had her hair up, same as she always did when she was working on something, and there was still flour on her cheek, and I was not going to point that out, because then I would have to either wipe it off or explain why I noticed it. "The Aldridge show opens Friday," she said. "I know. Brendan is bringing his gallery friends." Brendan was her ex. They had been together for 2 years and had separated in August, 7 months ago, quietly and by mutual agreement. Though from what Vivienne had told me over bad takeout the week after, the agreement had been a little more mutual on her side than his. He worked in contemporary art acquisitions, knew everyone in her professional circle, and had somehow managed to RSVP yes to the opening of the show she had been building for 5 months. She had not cried about it. She had sat in my apartment with her shoes off, eating pad thai, and saying, "I don't think he ever actually looked at the work. I think he looked at the room it was in and saw a version of himself he liked." That was Vivienne. She didn't fall apart in ways that asked you to clean up after her. She just said the true thing, quietly, and then moved on, and you were left holding the shape of it for weeks after she'd let it go. "You're not asking me to come," I said. I was still stirring. She was quiet for a second. "I'm not asking." I turned the heat down on the ganache. "What time should I be there?" She looked over at me. Something in her face shifted, the way a held breath shifts when you finally let it out. 7. But the bar opens at 6:30 if you want to have a drink before the crowd. "I want to have a drink before the crowd." She nodded. Then she went back to the batter and didn't say thank you because we were past the part of our friendship where things like this required formal acknowledgement. Showing up was just what we did. What neither of us said, while the ganache thickened and the afternoon light moved across her kitchen floor, was that Brendan wasn't really the problem. Brendan was just the reason she needed a reason. The opening was at a gallery space the Aldridge had rented in the West Loop, a converted printing warehouse with original brick and 40-foot ceilings and the specific kind of industrial refinement that made people feel like they were somewhere that mattered. Vivienne had designed the whole thing, The lighting plan, the wall placement, the way the pieces moved through the room so you followed a path without feeling led. I had seen photographs of it in progress. Seeing it finished was different. It looked like the inside of something someone had thought deeply about. I got there at 6:25. She was already there. Because of course she was, standing near the back wall, talking to a caterer with a tablet and the quiet, controlled energy of someone who had already solved 4 problems before I arrived and was currently solving a 5th. She was wearing a dark rust-colored dress I had not seen before. Her hair was down, which she never did at work, and she had earrings that caught the gallery track lighting every time she tilted her head. She did not look like someone who had been stressed baking 2 days earlier with flour on her face. She looked like she belonged to the room she had built. She spotted me across the space, said something brief to the caterer, and came over. "You're early," she said. "You're earlier. I live here now. I've accepted it." She looked me over once, the way she looked at a piece that had been hung the day before and needed a fresh assessment. "You look good. You look like the show," I said. "That's a compliment." "I know it is." She didn't smile, but her eyes did something instead. "Come on, the bar's this way." We had 20 minutes before the crowd, which turned out to mean we had 20 minutes of Vivienne walking me through the show while it was still empty and quiet, just the 2 of us, and the track lighting and the sound of servers setting up somewhere behind a partition. She walked me through it like she always did when she let me see her work. Not performing it, just narrating, pointing out decisions she had made and why, moments where a piece had surprised her. A corner where the natural light from a north-facing skylight did something in the afternoon she hadn't planned for but kept. This one was a problem, she said, stopping in front of a large canvas near the far wall. It was enormous, maybe 6 feet across, layered and dense, and somehow both chaotic and still. He painted it in a storage unit in Milwaukee, and when it arrived the colors were completely different from the digital file. I had built the whole sequence of the room around the digital. "What did you do?" "I rebuilt the sequence around the actual painting." She said it simply. "You work with what's real." I looked at the painting. Then I looked at her. She was still looking at the canvas with an expression that was thoughtful and a little private, the same expression she had when she was reading something complicated. "That's what you always do," I said. She glanced at me. "What? You work with what's real?" "Even when it's inconvenient." She held my gaze for a second longer than she needed to. Then she looked back at the painting. "Don't make it sound noble. It's just practical. It can be both." She didn't answer, but her shoulder moved toward mine, just slightly, the way a small adjustment happens before you realize you've made it. The crowd arrived and Vivienne disappeared into it, which was the correct and expected thing, but that didn't make it less noticeable. I watched her work the room. She knew everyone and moved through the knowing of them with a grace that looked effortless, because she had worked to make it effortless, which I understood now, in a way I wouldn't have 2 years ago. I talked to a sculptor from Pilsen who told me about a residency program in New Mexico. I listened to a woman explain the secondary market implications of an artist's estate sale in terms I didn't fully follow, but nodded along to politely. I got a drink from the bar and found a spot near one of the smaller pieces, a photograph of an empty parking structure at dusk that was more emotional than it had any right to be, and watched the room. 20 minutes in, Brendan arrived. He was with 2 men in well-cut jackets and a woman who laughed too often and too loud, the way people do when they're performing ease. He was handsome in the way that photographs well, the kind of face that made people assume a depth that may or may not have been there. He scanned the room with the practiced look of someone cataloging what was worth his attention. His eyes landed on Vivienne, then on me, then back on Vivienne. I stayed where I was. Vivienne saw him 3 minutes later from across the room. She didn't freeze, didn't visibly react. Her expression calibrated the way you calibrate something precise, and she redirected her conversation without missing a beat. She was good, she was too good, which was how I could tell it cost her something. Brendan made his way toward her eventually. I was too far away to hear anything, but I could read the shape of the conversation. His ease performed, her ease real, but working harder than it should have had to. At one point she laughed, and even from across the room I could see it was the professional laugh, the one she used on donors who told the same story twice. He looked over at me once during the conversation. I held his look without expression and went back to the parking structure photograph. 10 minutes later, Vivienne materialized beside me. "How's the Pilsen sculptor?" she asked, optimistic about New Mexico. "Good for him." She stood beside me looking at the photograph. Her champagne glass was still nearly full. "He looks exactly the same," she said. "Was he supposed to look different?" "No." She paused. "I just thought it would feel different." I didn't answer right away. The photograph in front of us had this particular quality of light, that late afternoon orange-gray that looked like something ending quietly. "Does it?" "A little," she said. "Less than I expected." She exhaled once, which I think means I'm further along than I thought. "That's a good thing." "Yes." She turned to look at me, just for a second, eyes steady. "Yes, it is. Brendan found me near the end of the first hour. He was smooth about it. He walked up with the body language of someone who had intended to be exactly where he was all along, and extended his hand. "Will, right? Vivienne's mentioned you." "Once or twice," I said, which was less than the truth. He smiled like he knew that. "She leaned on you a lot after we split." "She didn't lean. She just had somewhere to be." Something moved through his expression. He recovered fast. "She's talented, genuinely. I always said that. She knows." He looked out at the room. "She has a tendency to disappear into the work. I think you probably haven't seen that side of it yet. It gets harder when she's between projects. She pulls away. It's not personal. It's just how she's built. She needs to be useful, and when she isn't, she doesn't know what to do with someone who's still there." He said it the way people say things that used to hurt them, turn into observations so they don't have to feel like wounds anymore. I looked at him. I'd been there for 3 years through 4 major shows, 2 apartment moves, and the week her father was in the hospital in Phoenix. I kept my voice even. "I think I've seen the side of it." His jaw shifted. He didn't have anything ready for that. I left him there and found Vivienne near the entrance to a side room, standing alone for the first time all night, looking at a small piece mounted near the doorway. It was a charcoal drawing, minimal, just the suggestion of a figure in a window. She had positioned it there on purpose. She had told me when she walked me through. It was meant to be the exhale before the last room. She heard me coming and didn't turn. "He talked to you?" "Briefly." "What did he say?" I told her, not everything, but the shape of it. She listened with her arms crossed, not defensively, just holding herself steady. "He's not wrong about the disappearing," she said when I finished. "He's not wrong about the fact," I said. "He's wrong about what it means." She looked at me sideways. "You disappear into the work because the work matters to you," I said. "That's not a flaw in how you're built. That's just how things that matter to you look when you're doing them. The problem with Brendan wasn't that you disappeared. The problem was that he needed you to perform being present more than he needed you to actually be there." She was quiet for long enough that I thought I'd said too much. Then she said, "You know that's the most you've ever said at once in a room full of people. It's the most you've ever needed me to." She looked at me, not quickly, not glancing. Actually looked the way she looked at pieces she was deciding about. "Will." "Yeah, I need you to know something." The charcoal figure in the window seemed to lean slightly forward. "I have been calling you my closest friend," she said, "for almost 3 years. And that's true. That's not a lie. But I've also been using it as a very convenient place to put something I didn't know how to say out loud." I didn't move. "I'm saying it now," she said. "Because Brendan is 20 feet away, and he looks exactly the same, and it matters less than I thought it would, and I think I understand why." "Why?" I asked, even though I already knew. She looked at me steadily. "Because I've been comparing everything to the wrong thing for 7 months." Write in the comments, did Vivienne wait too long to say it? Or did she say it at exactly the right moment? From behind us, a voice said, "Vivienne, the collector from the Wicker Park group is asking for you." It was Danny, her assistant, appearing in the doorway with the look of someone who had genuinely not timed this on purpose but felt bad about it anyway. Vivienne blinked once. The museum version of her came back, smoothing quick. 1 minute. Danny disappeared back through the doorway. Vivienne turned to me. "Don't go anywhere. I'll be by the photograph of the parking structure. That's my favorite piece in the show." "I know. That's why I picked it." She went, and I went back to the parking structure and the particular dusk it had captured and stayed there holding my drink and thinking about 3 years of coffee when one of us had a bad meeting, and takeout when neither of us wanted to cook, and the way she had texted me from Phoenix the night her father's surgery ran long, still waiting, not scared. Okay, a little scared. Don't make a thing of it. I had not made a thing of it. I had just stayed on the phone with her until the doctor came out. Around 9:30, the crowd thinned. The string quartet the Aldridge had brought in packed up. The servers started consolidating the remaining champagne. Brendan and his group had left an hour earlier. I had seen them go, his departure as performed as his arrival. A hand raised to Vivienne across the room, a smile that gave nothing away. Vivienne stood near the central piece, her clipboard finally gone, her heels in one hand. She looked like the version of herself she only lets certain people see. The one after the event, when the useful face gets put away and what's left is just her. Tired and real and still. Somehow the sharpest person in the room. Danny came over with her coat and said, "Final numbers are strong." The board chair texted me 3 fire emojis, which I think means he's happy. Vivienne laughed once. That's his version of a standing ovation. The Milwaukee piece sold to the Wicker Park collector. Danny said it with deliberate casualness that fooled no one. First piece to move all night. Good. Vivienne looked at it across the room. He deserves the right wall. Danny looked between us. I'm going to gather the tablets and pretend I didn't notice anything. Notice what? Vivienne said flatly. Nothing at all, Danny said, then walked away with the careful neutrality of someone exercising great professional restraint. The gallery got quiet. Not empty. There were still staff moving near the back, someone running a floor sweep with a soft broom, but quiet enough that the sound of the building came back. The low hum of the HVAC, a door somewhere. Vivienne came over and stood beside me in front of the parking structure. Photograph one more time. Do you actually like it, she said? Or have you just been standing here all night because I told you it was my favorite? Both, I said. It's like looking at a moment just after something ended, but it doesn't feel sad. It feels like the thing that ended made room for something else. She looked at the photograph, then at me. That's the most perceptive thing I've ever heard you say about a piece of visual art. 3 years of osmosis. You've been paying attention. To everything, I said. It came out quieter than I meant it to. She turned toward me, fully, the way she had turned toward me in front of the Milwaukee painting earlier, not casually, deliberately. The heels were still in her hand. Her earrings caught the last of the track lighting. Will. Yeah. Earlier. What I said. I remember. I didn't say the whole thing. She looked at me evenly. Not nervous. Something more honest than nervous, aware. I've been careful with you for a long time, not because I didn't trust you, because I trusted you too much to risk getting it wrong. And being careful started to feel like being honest because I'd been doing it so long. But they're not the same thing. No, I said, they're not. I'm not careful right now. I know. Is that okay? The soft broom had stopped somewhere. The HVAC hummed. Yeah, I said. That's okay. She kissed me first. Not tentatively, not as a question. The way she did everything that mattered, decided, present, completely there. I put my hand at the back of her shoulder, and she let the heels drop onto the bench beside her without looking, and neither of us said anything for a long time after. When we pulled apart, she kept her forehead close to mine and breathed. Danny absolutely clocked that, she said. Danny is currently somewhere doing professional things and noticing nothing. Danny sees everything. Then she sees this too. Vivienne laughed once, small and real, and leaned her head against my jaw for just a second, just long enough for me to feel the weight of it, which was the realest thing that had happened all night. I drove her home across the river, the city loud and lit outside the windows, and her hand easy in mine on the console. She had her head against the seat and her eyes half open watching the streetlights move, and neither of us needed to fill it. At her building in Lincoln Park, I walked her up. Same elevator, same third-floor hallway with the loose baseboard near 3B that had been loose since winter. Same plant by her door that I had watered twice when she was in Phoenix because she had asked me to, and I had a key, and the plant deserved better than to wait. Inside, she dropped her bag on the bench by the door and turned. I have flour on this counter from Saturday, she said, glancing at the kitchen, because I have been completely out of my head since Saturday. I know. You could tell. The ganache was wrong. You overmeasured the cream. You never overmeasure anything. She looked at me. You noticed that. I notice things. You notice everything, she said. Not as a complaint. She crossed the kitchen and picked up a dish towel and set it down again without using it. Then she looked over at me. I need to say the rest of the thing I was saying, she said. The thing I started in front of the charcoal drawing. Say it. I have spent almost 3 years calling you my closest friend, she said, because it was true and because it was safe, and because I did not know what I would do if I said the truer thing and you looked at me differently. But you don't look at me differently. You look at me like... She stopped. Like what? I asked. Like the thing I make is worth looking at, she said, not just what I can do with a room. Me? I was already across the kitchen. I kissed her the way you kiss someone when you have been translating the feeling into other things for 3 years and you finally just say it in the original language. She had one hand on my sleeve and the other on the edge of the counter, and when we pulled back, she looked at me with something uncomplicated and open that I had never quite seen on her face before, not because it was new, but because she had never let me see her not holding it back. For the record, she said quietly, I knew it at the parking structure photo. The first night I showed it to you months ago in my draft layouts. You said it looked like a held breath, and I thought, who says that? And then I thought, you do. And I thought, oh, I said. Oh, she agreed. 6 weeks later, Danny mentioned it exactly once, in passing, while handing Vivienne a print schedule. She said, just so you know, the whole team figured it out by the 2nd week of the run. Vivienne said that proves nothing. Danny said it proves everything, and kept walking. The Milwaukee painting sold to a permanent collection in the end. The Wicker Park collector donated it to a museum in his wife's name. Vivienne told me about it over dinner in her kitchen on a Thursday. The same kitchen where she had stress-baked with flour on her face and handed me an ingredient list I had not read. I didn't tell her I had bought extra time that Saturday by stirring the ganache slower than it needed. She would have figured it out anyway. She always noticed the things that mattered.